Hi, I'm Mark Rudis, and this is my 1934 Rolls-Royce Touring Sport Saloon. This is one of either one of 40 ever made or one of 7. There is still debate about that. Rolls-Royce Historian insists it's one of only 7 that were ever made. Body is made by Park Ward. Rolls-Royce had 5 coach builders. And when you bought the car, you would sit with their artist and describe what kind of a body you were looking for. They would then recommend a coach builder. You would go there and start working with their designers, and while they were designing the body, Rolls would begin building the car. Rolls would assign 2 master mechanics to build each car. The cars are all built by hand. The sunroof, as far as we know, is the first sunroof in a car, also from Rolls-Royce. It's hand operated. The wood trim on the car is called bird's eye maple. What Rolls would do is when they would make the wood trim of a car, they would take a maple tree, they would burn a serial number in it, and each piece that went into this car has the exact same serial number on it. So if during the history of the car a piece broke or cracked or needed to be replaced, you would take it off, report the serial number to them, they would go into their storage, get out the original tree, and make you an exact duplicate so it matched. Remember, this was, when it was made, the world's most expensive car. It took 1.5 years to build, so money was no object. The engine is fascinating because the engine is built to a tolerance of 1/1000th of an inch and contains only 1 gasket as a head gasket. If you look carefully at a seam over here, you can see where 2 aluminum parts come together, and there is no gasket material in there. Rolls knew that any gasket material will eventually fail, and he didn't want anything leaking. So they would tell the mechanic, cast the pieces as best they could, and they would take them over to a steel table and cover it with jeweler's polish. The mechanic then sat there for up to 3 weeks, massaging the 2 pieces until they bound together and could withstand twice the pressure the engine was capable of developing. If they didn't leak, it went in the car. If they leaked, Charles Rolls told them, throw them out and start all over again. So if you wanted to buy a Rolls-Royce, you went to a Rolls-Royce dealer, obviously, and there were no complete cars sitting there waiting for you to pick one out. You would order the car, sign a contract, and they would tell you it would take 1 year to 1.5 years to build. When it was finished, they didn't deliver you the car. They would then test the car for up to 6 months because they didn't want to deliver anything that wasn't perfect. While Rolls was building all the moving parts, the chassis, the engine, the suspension, the transmission, they would recommend one of their coach builders. You would give them a basic idea of what kind of a body you wanted. They would recommend one of their licensed coach builders. And while they were building the body, Rolls continued working on the chassis. When they were all finished, they would marry the 2 together and then test them further to make sure everything worked properly and then deliver the car to you. The car was warranted for the life of the original owner, and the only thing that would invalidate the warranty is if a non-Rolls-Royce mechanic touched the car. So how would Rolls-Royce possibly know that? It was easy. He randomly reverse-threaded screws throughout the car. If it took 6 screws to hold on a plate, one of them you could be sure was reverse-threaded. Only Rolls-Royce knew which one. Rolls-Royce doesn't consider this engine broken in until it hits 250,000 miles. So you probably won't own it long enough or live long enough to break the engine in. So gee, David, thanks a lot. I owned the car for 2 years and never found any of the tools. This tool thing swings up and locks in place and becomes, the other side is wood, black wood, becomes the ceiling of the trunk. Now those tools are not metric and they're not American. They're called British Whitworth. It was the size of tools made only to fit Rolls-Royce's car. Up in that toolbox, something was rattling around, and this comes falling out. It's a compass. And to navigate back then, the map is a copy of what they gave you. Rolls gave you a map of London and a compass. That's Rolls-Royce GPS. This is the factory photograph, a copy of the original from Rolls-Royce, showing the car when it left the factory. The only thing you'll notice different is the factory gave you a black wall spare tire. And I remarked to my mechanic how cheap that was of them. He said, it had nothing to do with money. It was so that it would remind you, if you went out to your car and you saw a black wall on the car, You remember, I got to go get the splat fixed. Back when Rolls-Royces were being made, they're still being made today, but back then, 99 and 9/10% of them were designed to have a chauffeur drive the car. If you were that wealthy, and you're talking about incredible wealth, not just the owner of a big company, you wanted a chauffeur. Well, the guy who ordered this car said, no, I want to drive it myself. So they, of course, thought he was crazy, but the coach builders designed the body with the idea that he was going to drive it himself. Now, every other Rolls-Royce prior to that time had in the middle a very thick partition dividing the driver from the passengers, and inside that partition was a large piece of glass they could crank up for privacy. Well, since this car didn't have that, it brought the rear end, the rear end forward. Most Rolls-Royces, the rear of the car of these years goes straight down, and there's really nothing exciting about it at all. It's pretty ugly. Well, this slid this forward, giving it this magnificent curved line, and it's many people debate whether this is the most beautiful Rolls-Royce ever made because of that curve, and it exists simply because the guy said, I want to drive it myself. Now, this entire body, everything you see, is aluminum, which was a relatively new material in the 1930s. And if you want to see how thick it is, you can come up here. This is the firewall of the car, and that's a piece of aluminum. That is really thick stuff. They don't even know today how they managed to make those curves, but they did somehow. So underneath the aluminum, there's a wooden ash frame. Ash is an extraordinarily dense wood. It's so dense that even bugs cannot burrow into it. So Rolls figured if I make the car with an ash frame and an aluminum body, it'll last forever. Well, it's doing pretty good so far. This is known as the Flying Lady or the Spirit of Ecstasy. And the woman that was the model, his name was Eleanor Thornton. If you come in the back, I'll show you a picture of Eleanor. She became very famous by having a scandalous affair with a very famous man back then. It was such a big thing that her face and the story was in all the newspapers. This is her right here. And when Charles Rolls saw her picture in the paper, he said to his secretary, I want you to get in touch with her. I want to meet her. She didn't know why. He indicated it wasn't any of her business, but he said he was so taken by her beauty, the moment he laid eyes on her, he offered her a contract to be the model for his new hood ornament. She accepted. He then hired a very famous sculptor of that time named Skypes, and he became the sculptor who made the Flying Lady. He took it to the artist studio, told her, go behind the screen, take your clothes off, you'll find a white sheet. And he put a big floor fan down. He says, go in front of the fan and go like this. And that's her. So for having an affair, she is now immortalized for all time. She is the inspiration for the hood ornament. She's known as the Spirit of Ecstasy or the Flying Lady because she looks like she's flying. These are mud covers to prevent mud from getting inside the wire wheels. All these wheels are wire wheels, and most roads back then were dirt. So it's common, if you didn't have something to protect the wire wheels, mud would get in there, the wheel would then be out of balance, and the wheel would wobble. So Rolls put these covers on the front and backs of their wheels to prevent mud from accumulating on the wheels. But they are actually wire wheels. Some people take them off and they chrome plate the wheels, but that's not the way Rolls did it. And this car is restored back to exactly the way Rolls did it. This little thing is interesting. This is a blanket. Rolls-Royce, although the technology existed to put heaters in the car, he refused to put a heater in the car. Instead, he gave you a wool blanket that said Rolls-Royce. And the reason was the heater would have to go underneath the dash. And if it leaked, the ventilation for the transmission are in the floorboards facing up, so mud and water didn't get in them. But if it leaked, it would drip down into the transmission and destroy the transmission. So Rolls would not put a heater in their car. He gave you a wool blanket. If you had a heater put in, it invalidated your warranty. You could not alter anything of the car. The color, you can get many different colors, but you couldn't get the royal purple color. To this day, is still reserved for members of the royal family only. If I took this car and had it painted in the royal colors, the car would be worthless. So it's still to this day reserved for members of the royal family. And I never owned a Rolls-Royce, know nothing about them. So a friend went to a destination wedding out in St. Louis. He was there for several days and was bored and went into the local car museum called the St. Louis Car Museum. And this was, I think, in 2008. The economy had crashed and no one was coming into museums. So when he walked in, the owner approached him and said, anything you see is for sale. He said, if I don't sell something in the next week or two, I'm going to have to put a key in the door and close the museum. So my friend sent me a picture on his phone, a little picture of this car. And he said, Mark, if you don't buy it, don't buy it. It's gorgeous. And we assumed since the body had been restored, it had been mechanically restored. Bad assumption on my part. But I was very fortunate in that the owner gave me a price. I offered him half. He said, when can I have the money? I said, in 24 hours. He said, sold. It's a good thing I paid half because it cost over $20,000 to have the engine repaired. The engine had no damage to it, but the museum failed to drain the oil out of it. And as hard as the black top we're standing on now, that's what oil turns to. So the engine had to come out of the car. The master mechanic had to dismantle the entire engine, clean each piece, put it back together. I said, when is the next tune-up? He says, you tune this car once every 25 years. You got another 7 years to go. Rolls-Royce doesn't consider this engine broken in until it hits 250,000 miles. So you probably won't own it long enough or live long enough to break the engine in. One of the reasons the car runs so cool is it has an enormous radiator for a relatively small engine. This engine is known as the 2025. It's probably 40 to 60 horsepower at max. So these louvers in the morning are closed. Inside the radiator is a small can filled with ether. As the hot water goes around the can, the ether expands, pushes out a little rod, and these open. So the hotter the water becomes, the more these mechanically open, and then springs pull them back in as it cools down. This is all done without any electronics. It's all done mechanically by the genius of Charles Rolls. He was an absolute mechanical genius. The car is really designed to last forever.